Hello and welcome to CMMS training for DTE Biomass. In this video, we will do a basic eMaint overview that'll include description of what is CMMS, specifically for DTE Biomass. We'll go over logging in, user interface, specifically for looking at what tables are related to assets, PMs, tasks, work orders, and dashboards. Actions that are included in the tables, and some tools that we can use to filter or to manage the tables or columns that we see. Let's go ahead and go through what is CMMS for DTE Biomass. So for DTE Biomass specifically, eMaint basically consists of list of assets, which are equipment that will be used at or with a plant operation, and beneath that you'll have preventative maintenance schedules which are related to these assets. So an asset, for example, would be a chiller or a blower or a company truck, and preventative maintenance schedules consist of things like changing the oil or lubrication or doing any kind of regularly scheduled maintenance. And so within that bracket of preventative maintenance schedules, you have things like tasks and procedures, which are essentially the SWIs for these preventative maintenance items. And these will consist of actually SWIs, ECPs, JHAs, which can all be linked from SharePoint directly to eMaint, and we'll go over that in future videos. Also within that parameter of preventative maintenance schedules, you have work orders, which are generated either automatically from the PMs, which we'll go over again in other videos, or manually. We can generate PMs manually to produce work orders. So also in the future, we're going to include inventory into the system for eMaint. So this will consist of keeping track of consumables, things like oil, spark plugs, that are related to our preventative maintenance schedules. This will not be included, at least initially, in the introductory training. This will come eventually when each site and their facility technicians as well as facility managers are all comfortable with the eMaint system. So a very important part of PM schedules will also be dashboards, which consist of calendars and reports. So dashboards will be instrumental to weekly planning or even monthly planning. We'll touch a little more in detail on that in future videos. Let's move on to logging into eMaint. So when you click on the link that I will provide, or just provide this URL up here, it's https://x47.emaint.com. You'll come into this login screen, and depending on your site or which account you'll be using or login you'll be using, you'll put that user ID up here, your password that I will designate for you here, and again I will provide each of these for you. So if you have questions with that, you could always call or email me. Let's go ahead and log in. They just upgraded the system, and whenever they do upgrades, you'll get a message like this. You can just go ahead and proceed. So eMaint will load up, and this is the user interface. Just kind of go very briefly and very basically over this screen. So we'll just kind of go over things that you will need to basically ignore. So first off, this button up here, this is not a refresh button. This button will reset all settings within this account. You want to avoid that. Just avoid that entirely. As of right now, it'll cost eMaint too much to reprogram their software to remove it, so they just tell users to just avoid it. Other than that, though, other things will not have that detrimental of an impact. Like, for example, this is how you log out here. This controls the sidebar. This can collapse a menu or open it. This is just theme settings, which you'll not really have to do much with. This you can do a full screen, which again I personally have never really found use of. And any of this stuff you don't really have to deal with. This is more administrative stuff. Over on the left, you'll have your user ID here, and up here you'll have options for very basic options for managing your tables, meaning controlling what tables you see here on your side here. I think for this introductory training, however, we'll just put that aside and just focus on the important stuff, which is this. So here you have all your tables. The basic tables that you will be working with are going to be assets, PMs, and again, so every time you log into eMaint, it'll actually bring you back to where you left off last, which is fine. If you want to go back to a list, you just kind of go back to this list. So this is the table for assets. This is the table for PMs. And I'll go back to the list, you can see. So when you first log in, you'll see it in list form, just like this. And again, we'll go more into detail what all these columns are and what each one of these looks like when you open them. But for now, we'll just keep it very basic. So again, it says PMs, assets. You'll be using work orders. You'll be using tasks. Go back to the list here. This is what that looked like. And dashboards. So dashboards are actually, I mentioned in kind of the overview, it's going to include reports that you can use for planning. To show you really quick, so the only dashboard you're going to really be using is going to be upcoming PM schedules. So what this will do is it'll give you an insight into PMs that are going to be generated in this current calendar week, PMs that are going to be generated in the next calendar week, and PMs that are generated in the current month, and then the next calendar month. So that's kind of a brief overview on what each of the tables that you'll be using are. We'll touch a little bit on what are some actions and some tools within these tables that you'll be using. So let's go back, for example, to assets. So just kind of give a brief description here of what we're looking at. So this table will consist of columns, which will include the site, system, subsystem, component ID, which we'll talk in more detail about later, component description, building location, manufacturer, model number, rating, meter reading, meter ID, the last time that was added, and the last time it was edited. And now these columns may be different for you, but you could always change them with some tools that I'll mention in a second. But generally, these are the kind of columns you want to have on this table. And of course, you know, if your facility manager wants you to have different columns, that's okay too. We can change that. So as you can see here, a filter has been applied to this column, component description, to put anything on this list that includes the word engine. And you can do the same thing for anything, even just a letter. And you can change the way that filters with this button here. So you can say is equal to that exact value you put in, does not equal to starts with, I find more useful for it to contain whatever it is that I've put in here, because it'll actually give you a list of things that include that in their component description. And again, you can actually add multiple filters as well, so you can do all engines as well as system that, say, is just gas, and it'll filter further that way. And to get rid of filters, you can just delete them and hit enter, or you can clear all filters up here. And so now you have a list of all of the items that are associated to this table of assets. Down here is where you can go to several different pages. You can choose how many items are shown per page. In this case, it's 100. So that's how you navigate that. Actions you can take here when you, say, for example, select one or multiple items. So you can go to actions. You can either print information on those assets. You can distribute PMs to those assets. You can mass change values, which can include things like, well, I want to change what system these are all a part of, and you can do that way. And we can touch a little more in detail on how to do that in future videos or in-person training. You can choose things like deselect all. You can do select all. What select all will do is it'll select all of the items in this one page. So if you want to select all of the items in all of the asset table, you'd have to go through each page individually, which it's fairly quick actually once you get used to that process. But another way you can deselect all from each page is you can click on this button up here. Similarly, you can select all that way. And again, that's for one page at a time. And another action option on here is data export, but you shouldn't be dealing with that really. That'd be more of a administrative role. So another thing you can do here on this asset table is obviously add more assets or add a new record for an asset. We will go into more detail for that in a different video. You can customize your table to have a different color. If this helps you coordinate to see which table you're on and help you realize which table you're on, you can change the color that way. So I'll bring it back to what I had before. Here you can manage table relations, which you really shouldn't be dealing with that very much, so you can really skip that. You can create your own saved filters, and I can provide a separate video to further instruct on this, but you don't need to do that. If it makes your life or your work easier, we can have a conversation about that. This button here will basically give you an option to sort your table, but the reality is you wouldn't really need to do that either. But one option up here that you would find useful is managing your columns. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the columns that are shown here may be different than the ones shown in your login. So each login has different customizations, such as which columns are showing up in your table. So to change that, you just go to this option here. So here you'll see a list of the columns that are already on here. They call them selected columns. So if you wanted to move them around or reorganize them, you would do that literally by just dragging and drop them. And the changes don't apply until you hit apply changes, or you can close without saving the changes. But if you wanted to add or remove columns, you just hit this minus sign. And to add columns, you can look in different types of tables. If you need to look at different types of tables, but you typically don't. And you can add them either by hitting the plus sign or dragging and dropping them wherever you'd like to add them. And I'll hit close without saving. And if you do use a star system, you can select certain items or certain assets you want to star or keep highlighted, and if you click on this, it'll just show your starred items. And again, you can star several different assets or items in one page at a time and unselect them as well. So that concludes actually this overview. For the next video, we'll talk about assets and PM tables in more detail. Thanks.